So knowing your workforce is vitally important. Understanding that you've got baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Zs inside of your organization will help you build the proper communication strategy in order to get collateral and content out to these specific users to enable them on the new platform that you are deploying and migrating to from either an existing tenant, and there are some like-for-like examples there that are important to communicate, or from a legacy system into Office 365. So the scope of the workforce will generally define which workloads are adopted quickly in your organization, so to enable a more engaged approach. And then based on what you can see in the specific slide, you'll see there that there are preferences. So 2020 definitely changed a lot of the way that these users interact with each other across the different generations. Everybody working at home and having a lot of change fatigue because there's been a lot of change, a lot of stress, and a lot of pressure. And also having the lack of office-based and informal Q&A advocacy around these changes. You've got to build these models into the technology platforms to allow the users to engage with each other, to understand what's happening during the migration process. So change management activities are key to these successful migrations because user adoption is definitely at the forefront of the productivity and the reason why you would generally be doing this migration. So let's use a like-for-like example. You're moving from one tenant to another tenant, so you would think that it would be a pretty smooth transition, and generally it is quite a smooth transition for the user. We're not talking about the migration itself or how the back end works of that, but from a user perspective, they don't have to necessarily use any new platform. They're going to continue to use the same platform. However, there might be policy changes on your new tenant that did not exist on the previous tenant of the previous business that you might have acquired during an acquisition, as an example. One of those is external sharing. You might have allowed external sharing before, and as Chris and Johan have discussed throughout this presentation, that there's quite a lot to do in the security and governance space, and adapt and adopt and change, give you the capability to change a couple of things during this migration process. So you might have allowed users to share data or content previously, and now they're not allowed to share data or content in OneDrive or Teams, as an example. And that's a big impact on the users. So communicating that correctly to the users is vitally important. Helping them understand why that has happened and how they can work around that, and what the new way of working is exceptionally important to allow them to continue to be productive and not be adherent to not wanting to use a new platform or not wanting to be as productive because they feel that things have been taken away from them. So let's talk a bit about quickly creating some change management and adoption strategies and how we do that. So there is you can do a couple of things like internal email campaigns showing the users what is to come. You can do things like creation of a community for users, create a Q&A in Teams, because it's a very widely used platform. You can do it in Yammer and SharePoint as well if you want to allow users to go and ask other users questions. You could do things like sending out helpful tips on how to use specific workloads for collaboration. Those things are nice and important, enabling your users. You can do things like talking up front about these new policies and these like-for-like migrations, right? So why has it changed? What's the reason for that? And you can communicate that to them. You can assign workload champions, or power users as we like to call them, to help struggling users and alleviate that pressure off of IT. IT are busy with the migration, they're busy with a lot of context and content and moving that across and making sure everything moves across according to plan. And in that specific process, you can assign these workload champions or power users and get the users to interact with them, and get them to help the users use the new technology platforms, or help enable them in a better way and alleviate that pressure off of IT. So we have built this user run book, and it's stemmed from complex migrations, and that we've done in the past, like Notice to Exchange. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to hand over to Jan to do that. But before I do that, I also want to talk to you a little bit about the pre-migration considerations in this factor, and that's why this user run book is exceptionally important, because it helps us build a communication plan. We can do communication based on as you can see for the image here. We can do things like T-16 weeks to completion of migration. We can start sending out to specific AD groups the type of communication plan based on that. But as part of that, we also build in these pre-migration considerations. And what is that? Well, things like considering if you want to necessarily have a pilot phase to your migration strategy. Pilot testing is one of the most important pre-migration factors. It allows you the opportunity to test the throughputs, new data structures, permissions, and remediate all of that prior to doing the migration. Once you have that all in place and you actually then start the migration, the transition from the one tenant to another tenant or one specific legacy platform to Office 365, it will allow a very smooth transition because you've tested everything, you know it's going to work, you know how it's going to look in the end. And those pilot phases are exceptionally important in allowing you to do that as well. And then you could also do things like considering a phased approach. Phased approaches in a migration are very important because they design the migration approach, and it will also you will also then consider the impact of the users in the day-to-day function. You will build it all into this runbook, and you will be able to then use this to actually manage the migration process.
We use and we recommend most organizations use a similar process when they are progressing through a tenant-to-tenant migration. And our runbook process was born out of really complex migrations we often did before, especially notes to Exchange migrations. Those are natively very complex migrations that require a detailed communication plan, not only for marketing the change of platform, because notes to Exchange is a big change from an end user perspective, but also detailing all the steps that the end user will need to complete as part of the migration journey. And if the users don't complete the required steps, their success will not be as good as the user that followed the steps, and they'll have data missing in their Exchange mailboxes as part of those specific migration scenarios. So we recommend that you utilize a runbook and develop a runbook as part of your initial planning and piloting and testing of your migration to your new tenant. And the runbook is built to trigger specific activities in a countdown fashion that leads up to the actual migration or cutover for the wave of users. So for example, T-16 will trigger a communication, email-based communication to the end users with a link to an instructional video of what Exchange is and what Exchange Online is and what changes they will encounter as part of the migration. And as you progress further down the runbook, certain end user activities might be triggered in T-14. For example, they might be required to stop making changes to their home folders for a specific period of time. So the runbook is really built for and to handle complex communication requirements and ensuring you've got all the activities tracked and listed, and ensure that the automated communication is triggered at the right time to the end users. And it also keeps track of the technical steps that the migration team will be required to complete in the back end before and during the migration to ensure that the users being completed on that target date is complete in lead up to the cutover migration.